I'm Joe.
Hi, I'm Danny. We're here with Mick today. He's a real working man, and we're going to talk about the changes in working conditions over the last 40 or so years, which I think have been quite drastic in the UK. What do you think, Mick, from your experiences? You know, how big have the changes been in like the work environment?
Well, it was from the mid-70s, actually, which is going on towards 50 years now. The working environment was mainly manual work, engineering, mills, things like that. There were a lot more of that work. There was no computers, and it was a generational thing. Sometimes through factories, through mines, and through people would get a job and work there their entire lives, and the children would follow them. You know, it was a tradition. That came to an abrupt end in 1979 with the introduction of Thatcherism to the country. And the massive change within 4 years was unbelievable. Wages were going down. There was no construction for any workers, didn't have any rights anymore. And if you wanted to work, you were struggling to get by. You know, the divisions that were introduced by the government were catastrophic to communities and even families, right the way down to families. It was barely survivable, whereas in the 70s, in the early 70s, it was still unusual for both father and mother in the family to work at the same time. Maybe the mother might have had a part-time job, you know what I mean, a little bit of cleaning in the evening, but generally working class families were still running on one income, maybe one and a half. But then all of a sudden it became necessary for both to have full-time jobs. And that's if you could get a job, because the unemployment levels rocketed. So I don't know if there's any specific things that I can help you with. Those are generalizations. Many people actually fell out of work, became unemployed, long-term unemployed. Some people continued to work, but it was very, very difficult, very harsh. When you're living through it, you don't know. You're just going out to make the next buck, you know, the next dollar, feed your kids, put money on the table. And it became such a struggle. It just went through a lot of people. We went through our lives. It's like me, you know, nose down to the grindstone, just keep punching away, you know, to see if you could get through every week, every day. And more often than not, the 3 weeks into the month, you know, the wages had run out and there's still another week to go. So it's similar to today. Things are slightly better today, but that remains to be seen after this pandemic and see what happens after. Because we're still in the middle of another catastrophic change to every society.
yeah. Another big one.
Well, something I'm interested in there, you said the difference between, like, you know, the woman would often like have half a job or not work. What was it like with generations as well? Like, were parents helping the adult kids out? Were adult kids helping their parents out? And how's that changed to now?
Well, no, what tended to happen is that because there was employment, once most of the population, myself being one of them, were geared up to be part of the workforce. And so once you turned 16, you left school that Easter, you then went into a job. That may be a job that will follow into where your father worked, or, you know, sometimes on your own accord. You would then pay what we call board money, a minimum amount towards your keep then, because you'd become an adult. And your mum would use that basically to feed you. It was more of a token than an actual, you know, thing. And you were expected, as you know, as families go on, to do that for a couple of years, and then by the time you were 18 and voting and things like that, you were probably edging towards moving out of the home and becoming an adult yourself. You know, self sufficient. You know, independent of your family. Yeah.
That's a huge change that you could actually afford to move out at 18 now. I mean, if you're going to university, you do, but you rack up so much debt then there that you're struggling afterwards a lot of the time.
Unless you've got a privileged life,
Yeah,
where you pay,
true.
you can't. So you can't really afford to move out because you put yourself in debt. Yeah. Back then, you probably could, and there was a thing where people had families younger then. You know, myself, I had kids when I was young, whereas now it's going. You know, people are getting towards 40 before they're settling to be able to have a child. But back then, it was much easier. Work was more readily available, and you know, before the introduction of what I could only imagine to be called fancy accounting, when people were finding ways of making money on paper rather than in real sense, everything seemed to work. People worked, and that's what you knew. But then through the 80s, that all changed. That you know, I don't know.
I think we're touching on something me and Joe go on about all the time when we're talking to each other, which is how weak families have got, if they even exist at all anymore. And that's the main driver. That's got to be the work environment. How much time work takes up, how far away it takes you from your family a lot of the time, often to different countries now.
You see, back then when I said the divisions in society went from dividing the workforce, dividing union, the destruction of all that, it went right down to a family level. Because during the mid-80s, it was very difficult for a family to stick together to support itself. In one hand, that government gave us easy access to mortgages, which was good. But then the interest rates started going up. The mortgages started to become more expensive. And then you found that, to be honest, to live as a couple with 2 children, you couldn't survive. The expenses were too much. So you either had to hand your keys in and give up your house, which then long term caused probably arguments. It caused friction within the family. You know, big traumatic instances like that would crack up a family later on. Or people were actually separating because the woman could then bring up the kids. And this was a production. This was what you call a byproduct of what were happening. They could bring up the kids on benefits and a little bit of maintenance from the father, but the father would move out, split up the family, and quite often that remained a permanent thing then. And it was the only way that they could survive and live in a house.
Yeah.
You know, and what can I say? You know, many people survived ducking and diving and dodging and still trying to see the family. Some people got into trouble for it. And that's the way a lot of working class people went. Families actually got divided. And then, of course, with the introduction of the good old poll tax, where everybody in the household over 18 had to pay the rates. So your working class family, if there were 5 people in that house, and if the rates were, say, £100 a month, it was suddenly £500 a month. You'd all got to chip in, you know. So kids at 18 were forced to actually move out of home because they couldn't afford to stay there.
Yeah. And like you said,
yeah.
And like you said, the work, you know, the kind of jobs of the fact that there were jobs available changed. You used to be able to get a job at 16 easy enough. Then it was a struggle. What was your first job after you left school?
My first job, I actually, my first official job, I did little bits of work before I left school, but my first official job, I worked in a mill.
Very Bradford.
Yeah, young lad working, you know, jobbing lads they called us, and you started off there. And if you stayed at that job, you moved up and you progressed. Because most working environments then, you didn't get a college course to make you a manager. You had to have practical experience, and you gained that through working on the shop floor. So quite often, a works general manager would have started out life pushing bobbing carts around and, you know, taking things up and down, you know, moving things around the factory. So if you challenged them on a decision to make, quite often they could roll the sleeves up and show you a thing or two because they'd done it all. That doesn't exist anymore. That stops, again, the ones that were were able to get into the technical world in the 80s were going leaps and bounds. And the way to go was to cut staff. Everywhere we're running on skeleton staff, as indeed we are today, maybe through different reasons, but it's still happening. I mean, right now, nobody can get staff because nobody can go. Well, there ain't any people around. You know what I mean? It's businesses are struggling to open because of the lack of staff right now. And I don't know, back then there were people willing to work, they wanted to work, they're used to working, and suddenly you couldn't find a job. And there were many times it was quite a hopeless situation. I mean, in the mining community, when all those villages and everything shut down, you go around those villages today, and they're a different planet. They're just people there. They've no hope. They've never had it because that's all there is in the area. There was nothing else. So, and businesses got smaller, with self-enterprise. And
when those mining communities were shut down, did how many of them came to places like Bradford to look for work?
Funnily enough, a few, but not as many as you'd think. There wasn't a mass migration away from those villages because those people had grown up from generations in those places, and that was their lives. They didn't know much outside that. And of course now, the world's your oyster. You know, you can jump on a plane and go virtually anywhere. Back then, it was unheard of. People didn't, you know, they didn't. So they wouldn't have thought of traveling to another country to get work, let alone, you know, another town were often quite a big step. You know, it was a massive step. So, because you know, you couldn't just uproot, take everybody, land on the council doorstep, and say, "Give us a 3-bedroom semi." The family's moving in. We're looking for work, because that just wouldn't happen. Someone would have to go and sound it out, and then of course you found the difficulty in getting housing was a problem, and really, people were, you know, it's little wonder they were rioting and fighting with the police. To be honest, they were fighting for their lives. They were fighting for the communities.
Yeah, and if we get onto mining, obviously something that Thatcher famously done is go to war with the unions, in particular the mining unions. What are your thoughts on the unions and how that's changed? I mean, there's not many of them about anymore, really, is there?
There were, I think the unions back then needed some better structure, because sometimes they'd become too powerful in the motor industry, the plants. They'd go out. Myself personally, I was working in a plant that made brake linings for cars, and I've been out on strike because it was a closed shop. You had to be in the union to get a job there. And I've literally been out on strike because of a packet of crisps. That's where the union became too powerful and a little bit too ridiculous. You know, they'd go out on strike, they'd cause a problem at the drop of a hat.
A packet of crisps.
I'll say one morning there was no plain crisps in the vending machine, and one of the workshop mouthpieces kicked up a fuss, and there was, and then one of the union men overheard it, and that goes down until we got, because they'd make it like a courtroom drama, and it was like, we have to facilitate people's needs and their comforts and this and that, and they've got to have the breaks. And then when there were no plain crisps machine, that was it. You know, I'm not having it until there was some playing cricket in that machine. We were outside playing cricket until they'd sorted it out.
Were they also sorting out, like, let's say, proper issues as well, or were they sort of failing on the proper issues and sorting out the nonsense issues?
With the proper issues, there'd always be an interim. There'd always be a little bit of a scuffle and a fight over wages and conditions. And if they didn't want to put the wages up too much, they'd try and sweeten it with a few better conditions. You know, and that would just sort of keep going. Nobody were getting rich out of it, but it were pacifying people. You know, you could get by because they'd offer you, you know, 0.5% pay rise. Somebody'd ask for 4%, and it would end up at 1.5%. You know, and it was just that kind of negotiation. But with the, you know, they managed somehow to divide the unions and kind of make it that everybody was divided. in the early 80s. We did this thing, they divided and conquered, basically. They split everyone up and made you look after yourself. That's it, you're on your own, Jack. You couldn't rely on anybody else to back you up. So there was none of this where we think, right, you really are treating us badly now. So we'll see how you go on if you do the job yourself. And that all stopped. And picket lines, as they used to have, there were some terrible problems with those, but they just stopped happening. They fizzled out. People lost the will to fight. It just took everything away from the spirit of any community, really.
So at the same workplace, you just sort of gradually, as time went on during that time, there'd just be fewer and fewer picket lines for the serious issues until there's none, basically. And you get more, I guess you get more and more non-union staff coming in as well.
That's right, yeah. And I mean, when was the last time you heard of a strike?
Yeah, it's unbelievable. I
mean, not a proper one,
where the company's literally refusing to pay people who are going from Bradford to Glasgow to do football game shifts. And not only was there not a strike, people would turn up the next month to do some more shifts for free, essentially. And there was never any talk of a strike or getting together any collective action. One of Thatcher's famous quotes is, "There is no such thing as society." And I think she's made that reality in the UK now. There's really not really a society anymore. We're all a collection of individuals fighting each other, competing with each other.
You should have finished that sentence off by saying, "There's no such thing as society because I say so."
Yeah. And I'm going to make sure of it. Yeah, I'm going to make sure there's no such thing. Yeah, and she did. I've heard it described as she sort of fed the class system to itself, and she split the working class in two. Some of them joined the lower middle class, and a lot of them were forced into an underclass because, like I said, you can't become the working class because they're not working because they can't really get jobs anymore. They're just trying to get by. It's quite shameful, I think.
From then you can see the progression of government-backed, even now today, government-backed schemes which actually hold back certain people. Like now, there's people unemployed in this country. They're crying out. They're crying and crying. There's 60,000 job vacancies for wagon drivers. Well, if they back the workforce and gave those people and funded the that are at work to get the licenses, because I mean it's a couple of grand, and people who have been working on minimum paid jobs just don't have that in the back pocket to pay for this. But I'm pretty sure they'd go through it if they had some help.
I know a couple of people specifically who were thinking that exact thing. If I had the money, I'd be doing that right now.
Yeah. It costs so much to get employed now. And I think that's another change you touched on, is that before, experience was what's valued. To become a manager, you need to have experience in that factory. And a big change, I think, which started in the 80s, is now it's qualifications. It's training courses, it's degrees, it's certificates. And those cost money a lot of the time.
This is what I mean. People found a way of making money out of that. Now, when I worked in engineering, I was licensed for, I was tested internally with the company. It was one of the biggest companies in the world, GEC, but to drive all their internal trucks, forklifts, cranes, you name it, I've still got the license knocking about somewhere in a booklet. But then all of a sudden, going through the 80s, on that, you could get jobs in other places if work was running thin, or like I got laid off at that place, it partially closed down. You could take your licenses to another place and they counted, just like your driving license does today. But then somebody came out with an idea of, we'll make this an health and safety rule. You'll have to redo your course every 3 years, or every time you want, or you've got to go on a government-backed course to prove that you're competent and pass like a national test. And that then costs a couple of grand. So I can no longer, with decades of experience driving those trucks, I can't get a job now driving a forklift, which is quite well paid, because my licenses count for nothing anymore.
Even though you're going to be better at doing it than someone who can potentially afford it and has not done it before.
That's right, yeah. Because I'd have to get re-licensed. And any license now, I mean, the forklift license, it's a couple of grand. And all these training courses are all backed by the government, and so it's all going into somebody's pocket, except the guy trying to get a job.
Yeah, and
Uh,
it's all forced through the government and then outsourced to one of their friends as well.
One of it, yeah, a private
yeah,
company owned by one of their friends, and then when they leave government, there'll often be a nice board position on that company, which pays a nice salary for those people in government who's created that situation. Yeah, it's a little circle, a little revolving door. They call it a lot of the time, don't they?
while their bank balance is getting fatter, the working guy's getting nothing. He's actually paying for it.
Yeah, it's priced out of the market. Yeah. Yeah, and these tests a lot of the time they only test that you can pass the test. It doesn't test you can actually do the job you're then officially qualified for. It's all very circular. Yeah, it's quite a mess.
Example, working outdoors, working with security. Job I'd been doing for years. I suddenly found myself having to pay to get a license to continue working in that industry in 1999 or whenever it was.
Yeah.
Why? You know what I mean? Well, after 40 years of experience, do I need to take a course off somebody who's half my age?
Yeah, yeah, with a tenth of your experience. Yeah,
learn what he knows from a book in college, but yet that qualifies him to teach me how to do something that I've been doing for 40 years.
Yeah,
Kind of, it's a bitter pill to swallow from a working man's point of view.
Yeah, and I think why is he that part of it is this overproduction of elites. You've got a lot of people who go to university now, and there's not that many jobs for them, but they have enough credibility and social standing. They'll create jobs for themselves. And a lot of it is, regulating people who actually have real world experience. It's they're a managerial class. A lot of the term is used from as the professional managerial class. That's what they do. They manage the workforce. What's left of it? I mean, there's not a left to manage anymore, but they need jobs, so they'll create positions for themselves.
That's one of the interesting things about this pandemic. We've realised that most of the people that are running these businesses are the people that are sat behind the tills, sat behind the steering wheels of buses, doing the jobs because the management are all sat at home doing nothing.
Oh yeah.
They've not been missed. That's the thing. But what do we do with them? How do we get in a position where the working man has a voice to sound this out so that other working men can hear them and think, you know what, you're right, I've heard that. Yeah, I've thought that. Just like you said, there's people thought of doing jobs right now, but they can't afford to get on the market because they don't have the funding to do it.
Yeah. And which political party is going to speak up from? Because obviously we've talked a lot about Thatcherism, which is conservatism, but Labour has been in power since then, and they did not reverse most of these changes.
And something you just said then, when you had to get that license for doing the doors, that was 1999, and that was Labour in power. So
Labour, yeah.
So what did you notice after the Tories got out in 97? What did you notice the job situation, the family situation changing then?
It didn't. It never really has. There is always, with governments change, there are always some changes which the previous government have put in, and whoever takes over after, they leave them because it works for them as politicians. It doesn't work for anyone else. You know, there's 60 million or so people that need it to work for them. It doesn't work for them. As long as it works for the politicians, it's fine. So they can always, if it don't work, they can always blame it on the previous government. But I've never yet seen one change anything and say, right, we're stopping that today and we do now doing this. You know, okay. I mean, a working man today he's not a working man, he's a wage slave, because he's earning just enough to prevent him throwing it in and saying, look, I'm not working anymore, why would I work for this? But he's just got that tiny little bit more freedom, and they know this. You know, we're definitely, well, like you said, an underclass still.
Yeah, we need a Labour Party which represents Labour, because this current one doesn't. It represents the professional managerial class. Yeah, it's a misnomer calling it a Labour Party. Who in that leadership is actually working class? I mean, some of them have working class backgrounds, but I'd say the dividing line is if they've been to university and if they're doing an office job after that. And almost all the ones who do have some working class background have done that. They've moved up into the middle classes. Yeah.
But I've got to say it now. When it comes to, and I can't help saying it time and time again, when it comes to the leader of the party introducing himself as Sir Keir Starmer, that Sir just separates him from any working man in this country. Yeah. You know, what would you know, Sir Keir Starmer, you know, about getting his hands dirty or bruising his back, or like me yesterday, rolling around for 6 hours trying to repair my own car because even though I'm working that donkey, I can't afford to take it into a garage. Do you know what I mean?
It's a very good point. I don't know many brickies who've got knighthoods. I don't know, you know what I mean? Don't know many mechanics or cleaners with knighthoods, yeah.
Knight of the realm, yeah. That's not something that
you don't get that for grafting your ass off, yeah, putting in them 70-hour weeks on a building site, yeah.
There are things that you do get it for that he's got it for, though. They're certainly not that kind of job.
Well, this is it again. It's like we've got an elite sort of structure of management that seems to manage all the plebs. But plebs, we've got brains and hearts and feelings, and we're not just automatons that just do what they do to make them money. The shift in wealth in the last 50 years is incredible. It's unbelievable. From say 10% of the population having 90% of the wealth, you've now got 1% that's got 99% of the wealth, and the rest of it is scattered between the rest of us.
And that divide has also massively increased even just during the pandemic as well.
Yeah, I think Thatcher put the boot to the working class. I think it's the middle class's turn now. I think they're next for liquidation, and we're starting to see it because they're out of work as well. A lot of them with the university degrees can't get jobs either. They're surviving on benefits. They're going into whatever low-paid work they can do at call centres or like business admins for like £15,000 a year, something like that. Which
supermarkets. There's a lot of
cashiers, yeah.
Meanwhile, the top elite of these companies are racing each other to space on the profits that these people make, and off the skin of their backs, you've got your Richard Bransons and that other fellow, I can't remember his name, going up in rockets. Bezos, yeah. Wow. Thanks for that. You know what I mean?
Is it?
Outside clapping their hands at Amazon saying, "What a good job, boss. You made it to space." Let's hope you don't make it back.
Yeah, it's you've got the Amazon delivery drivers, literally we've just had a story about them peeing in bottles to get their shift done, so stopping in the gutter to have a quick leak, and then you've got the boss flying off in a rocket to space. So yeah, you can't get much more of a drastic contrast than that, can you? It's really shocking.
So I suppose there's a bit of irony there, isn't
there? Yeah.
Will be pissing in his own space, so at least these guys have got it.
It's unbelievable.
Clapping for their boss, you know what I mean? What an achievement, boss. You know what I mean? You'll be struggling to do with a shift and think, why am I doing this?
Yeah. I've heard it called techno-feudalism, and it is like the peasants. Oh, what gown does the Lord have today? To wear to the banquet while we're eating pigeons. If we can catch.
Well, and they're also planning on going back to a sort of state that we did have. I mean, in Saltaire is an example of this, and this was quite common in the US, where a businessman basically owns the town, and that's what they're planning on going back to. Some of these billionaires, they're planning on creating their own towns, and even paying their workers in like credits that you can only spend in the town, so you're not even getting real money for it.
Yeah.
Who does that suit? Because that takes away your freedom. All you can buy is what they're putting in their supermarkets.
Yeah.
You can't go anywhere else and get anything else. You're virtually trapped in your little works village. With at least with Saltaire, which is tight salt, you could get on an horse and cart and toddle off to Leeds and get something from their market that might be different from Bradford, but the way the construction today, like I say, not giving anybody money, who does that suit? It suits the bankers, it suits the governments, and it suits the one or two individuals that have got all the money.
Yeah, and on everything. Yeah, and I think we're touching on something that I'd really love to get your experience of, Mick, which is one of the wealth transfer mechanisms is changes in wages. Now we're talking about, you're not even going to get paid in money, but in your experience, what happened to wages over the years?
They went initially. You could earn, like I say, it wasn't so much the wages, but a wage in the late 60s and early 70s, one wage would just about cover family expenses. And the wife went out to work part-time, that would be extras. Or if they'd taken on any little debt, it would pay for that. But back then, people didn't go flying off on 2 foreign holidays a year and things like that. So it was the value of the money versus what you would get, from the shops, how far the money would go.
Yeah.
Living shrank dramatically in the 80s because everybody found a way of making more money. But unfortunately, they didn't find a way of giving the working man any more money. And this is how it sort of filtered out. Your wage was thinner and thinner and thinner. And even though now with the introduction of minimum wage, and then they tried to change that with a national living wage, still minimum wage, it's still rock bottom, and how much incentive does that give you? Like, oh, we've done a great job. We'll make wages at the minimum that they can pay you. They're going to pay you at minimum, aren't they? So you'll get up every day to go out and be Mr. Minimum. You know what I mean? That gives you a great deal of pride in yourself, doesn't it? Yeah. And when there's nothing else on offer, what do? You go home and stay unemployed and say, I'm not working for that money, or you go and take it and struggle on it. Either way, there's a lot of depressed people out there.
That also seems to be something that was a bit different back then to now as well, in that you said that when you wanted to increase the wages in the factory you were working in, you did it in the factory you were working in. But nowadays, I don't think it's not done on a local level. It's not done like, this factory, we're going to increase the wage.
Yeah.
It's done nationally. There's the national living wage or the national minimum wage or whatever.
That's a great point.
And you don't get a say in it.
Yeah, and cost of living varies huge by region by region. I mean, how far is it £9.10 the living? How far does that get in London? You can sort of, I mean, it's a struggle even in Bradford, but cost of living varies massively by region. Yeah.
Well, you just have to look at the living conditions, like the places where people are living in London compared to Bradford on the same sort of jobs, sharing rooms with strangers in London.
But if a dozen people to like a room, it's ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's the situation that we had in Saltaire when it was opened. We look at Titus Salt like he was some sort of savior, and he built a pretty little village.
Very
so that was a dozen to a room with a pig and a sheep in it. It's not. It wasn't idyllic.
It was not. Yeah, certainly not back then. Yeah.
And now, ironically, the people that live in Saltaire in the mills that he built that have now been converted into apartments that are selling for, just under $250,000 a time.
Yeah.
They're the highly paid. They're the managers. They're now living in the mills.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And commuting to Leeds to do some tech job or something. Yeah. That's one of the most obvious sort of cost of living increases is housing, the cost of housing. How's that changed over the years, Mick, from what you've seen?
Well, in 1986, I bought a 3-bedroom semi-detached for £17,500. Well, I got a mortgage for it. Yeah. That same house now.
Wait, before we, what sort of salary, what sort of wage were you on back then?
Well, right, let me think. I was on less than £100 a week.
And it was 17.5 for the house.
Yeah. So
in a year, you'd be getting £5,000. So it's like 4 years, let's call it 4 years wage.
Yeah.
4 years wage.
All right. And then nowadays, how much are you earning now, and how much is the house going to be worth about, do you reckon?
That house would now be worth about 165, maybe 170. In fact, now, in the last couple of months, house prices have gone up dramatically. It might be going on towards 200,000.
Yeah, probably 200,000 right now, wouldn't it?
And that'd be lucky. Yeah, I mean, don't know if you want to say how much you earn at the minute, but I know from my situation, I'll be thinking what I earn. It's more like 11, 12 years wage to try and get a house.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned, Joe, the house prices go up, look.
House prices are going up.
So it just gets further and further away the more time off,
And for anyone watching not in Bradford, I mean, Bradford is actually, I think, if not the cheapest place for housing in the country, at least one of the cheapest places for housing in the country. But those wages that you two are on don't change if you're in a different part of the country.
The
So
other as well, of course, is Bradford, and at one time Huddersfield, poor place in West Yorkshire, are the lowest paid. The people are, on average, paid lower than anywhere else in the country.
Yeah.
So,
because they find ways to cheat the minimum wage, don't they? They find deductions for borrowing a tie something, or costs of this, cost of that. So they find ways to cheat that a lot of the time.
Yeah, this clever accounting that they do. And every time it comes off the backs of the people that, and sometimes you're working so much, you're so busy, you ain't got time to stop and argue about it.
That's something else. And so what do you think about the quality of work that's done now compared to back then? Because from what I've seen in just last few years, I've seen a lot more cutting corners, a lot more, just avoiding trying to do the difficult stuff that might make it safer, because they're in the time, they're in the money, get it done quick.
And also there's an attitude with a lot of, dare I say it, it's like younger people from a different generation, that they have a bigger sense of entitlement. So it's like, well, I'm not doing that, or I'm not, and their work ethos is absolutely abysmal. I'm not saying everybody should be a workaholic, but at least do a fair day's work for a fair day's pay. And there's not a lot of up-and-coming people now that have that ethos. When people like me, when we're gone, I don't know what these companies are going to do. But like you say, products are getting substandard. The way that they're delivered is getting substandard. I don't mean delivered by the van, but the way they are. And unfortunately, I think for your generation, there's a lot of acceptance of, well, that's the way it is.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have had that in the early 60s, early 70s. If you had that attitude, you would find yourself down at the Dole office. You know what I mean? Because, well, that's just the way it is. No, it isn't. You've got to stand, you're always saying stand up for your rights, but people just don't. When things don't get delivered now through everybody ordering things online, they throw things at you. And it's just, well, it's appalling. It really is. I wouldn't accept 90% of what I get offered to. When you go to a shop and you've got people there that don't understand what you're talking about, oh, I don't know, I only work Saturday. Well, hang on, but yet you still get paid for working that Saturday. So learn the products that you've got here. You know what I mean? It's on the shelf behind you. Turn around, it's there. This is all too common today.
Yeah,
and it's the way that people work. I mean, I've gone to the cinema. And just asked to book 2 days later to watch a film, and the people don't know what they're doing, but they're kids. They're literally kids. Like maybe they're in sixth form or something. No one's told them what to do, and they're only going to be there for a couple of months, so they don't bother learning. They go on to the next one, and this is the thing: people are only in a job now for a short amount of time, so they're like, well, whatever. Then I'll just do it. I'll just stand there for a few months, and I'll go on to the next place.
I think it's something Mick's touched on before. There's no pride in work anymore. People don't take pride in it. They don't want to do a good job. They just want to do whatever they have to get paid.
And that's it, the bare minimum, because they get paid the bare minimum.
Yeah, so why would I expect much more? Yeah.
It is despairing. I mean, I can't wait to retire and get the hell out of it, to be honest. And extending people's retirement at this stage is just, well, it's criminal. Making you work longer. What are they getting out of you? Because then again, you don't feel like working. You think, hang on, I've done my bit. You know what I mean? I've paid him. What am I paying for now? And I think it would benefit the country more and make some of these younger people have a different ethos if they got rid of some of those old timers now, because they reckon there's going to be no work after this pandemic. There's going to be plenty of work if you get short of it, and the economy wouldn't suffer either way. In fact, it'd suffer less, because what you'd have to pay me extra pension for a couple of years is way less than what you're going to pay somebody who's now 28 years old and they might potentially never have a job.
Yeah, a lifetime benefit. Yeah.
And kids, they've got all the benefits to go with that. That's going to cost a few quid.
Yeah, and there's health problems as well with not working. So if you've not worked at all in your life, and it's gonna cost more to look after people who haven't worked, because there's a lot of health problems that's
big mental health problems, isn't there? A lot of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, that's probably a bigger issue than some of the physical ones. we don't know. I've seen a few people over the last year cave in mentally, and they've been quite your highly paid managers, and you're privileged, and they can't cope with not being able. We've been restricted. They can't do. We've been restricted.
Yeah.
And yet they're expecting people like us to just keep going and going, like we're just standing on the side, waiting to get up and go for them and go that extra mile for them. And
yeah. For no extra one there, but I mean, the biggest example of that is the nurses. If done all these extra shifts with all this extra risk, quite a lot of them have died of coronavirus because they're in such close contact with it. And then you offer them a 1% pay rise, which with the increasing cost of living is basically a wage decrease. I mean, that's beyond a slap in the face. That is really outrageous.
And we've got a guy that thinks that the health minister that thinks the rising numbers in cases and infections and hospitalizations is going in the right direction. And he's just announced today for the safety of the people in London that they should continue wearing face masks on public transport and in enclosed areas. But the rest of us, what about the rest of us? Anything north of Watford, we're on our own, mate. You know what I mean? We're done.
Yeah, Dr. Desh Sajid Javid, unbelievable how he's just openly talking about, a lot of you are going to have to die. And nobody's actually rebelling against that. Again, people won't fight for their rights, even their right to live. And we were at risk of ending on a positive, but to end it on a negative, like you're touching on, getting the older people retired is a safety measure at this point because they're the ones who's vulnerable to coronavirus. But this is another change over the years. Is retirement ages have shot up and shot up. They're talking about for our generation, your mid-70s, you're going to have to retire. What? How much work can you do in your mid-70s? I mean, what shape are you into work at that point?
If you get people like me out the workforce now on my pension, that's going to be much more easier for me to then stay away from the general population, get infected, and end up in hospital and costing a big bill on NHS. Whereas your younger people, it's not affecting quite so badly. They can get back into the workforce. But saying that, so the things that have, one of the other things that's changed is that back in the day, in the old days, people went on strike. Sometimes a firm might be on strike for a month, 6 weeks, and that firm could keep going. The few bits of orders they got in, they could keep zipping them out here and there. But the economy, they could hold off. So the negotiation, if they really dug in. Whereas today, if people stop working for a week, Amazon and Virgin and places like that, they would be on their ass. They would be in turmoil if people just stayed at home for a week because they rely on that much stuff going like this 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
To be honest, one day would do quite a lot.
Massive collateral damage in one day, let alone a week.
But I think this is why they can create businesses like this, because in the time that you've gone from when you first started working to now, it's completely taken away any chance that people are going to down tools and walk out. And so now they don't even have to consider it as one of the risks when they're doing this. They know you're not going to do it. They know no one's going to do it.
There is a whole generation of people that don't even know what a strike is. I mean, I've got one of my lads is in his 40s and he wouldn't know. Do you know what I mean? He's never experienced something like that. So it's not ingrained in them to have any rights, if you know what I mean. They expect not to have any rights. And that's the thing about this acceptance of, well, that's the way it is, isn't it? And that's why more common people don't vote, because there's no reason to vote for government, because they're all as bad.
Yeah. More people don't vote than vote for any of the parties.
Yeah.
You've got mates running the old Etonian club down in government. You've got Serkius down who's supposed to be representing working class, and nobody else.
Yeah.
You've got your lunatic liberals that are just, I don't know where they're at all.
Yeah. They sort of self-destructed.
Some of the other classes, we just don't.
Yeah.
If it were up to Green Party, we'd all be riding horses and living by candlelight. You know what I mean? We'd never growing our own vegetables, fertilising ourselves.
Yeah. The underclass would, Mick. The Greens would all be driving £60,000 brand new Teslas and living in 5-bedroom houses with 3 people in them. That seems to be the structure of that party for the most part. Yeah. So I guess we can end on a bit of a positive that there's still a solution to this.
Yeah, it's
It's
just
a general strike. Yeah.
General strike, and also getting people towards the end of their working life retired early, getting more younger people into work.
Let them retire. And
Yes.
then the younger people need to get a bit old school communist on it, class consciousness, and strike and fight back against the bosses, as it were. And we can maybe fix some of these societal ills that we're all sort of starting to suffer under now. Thanks so much, Mick. Loads of great information in there. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for coming, Mick.
Nice to meet you. Yeah. Cheers. All right.
Cheers.
Good night, gentlemen.